Welcome to Chapter 3. We'll be talking about communication and the self today. If you think about who you are, it might take you a few minutes to come up with a list of 10 words that describe the most important features of who you are. They might be social roles, physical characteristics, intellectual, moods, feelings, or attitudes, social characteristics, belief systems, your work, or particular skills or activities that you have. Essentially, this exercise helps you to come up with an idea of what your self-concept is. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Communication and the self-concept. The self-concept defines a relatively stable set of perceptions that you hold of yourself. Imagine a special mirror that reflects your physical features, but also the other aspects of who you are, such as your emotional states, your special talents, your likes, your dislikes, your values, your roles, and so on. This reflection is your self-concept. Communication and self-esteem. Self-esteem defined is the part of the self-concept that involves evaluations of your self-worth. Your self-concept might include being quiet, argumentative, or serious, but how you feel about these qualities determines your self-esteem. Self-esteem evaluations begin at a young age and have a powerful cyclical effect on communication behavior. People who feel good about themselves have positive expectations about how they will communicate. These feelings increase the chance that communication will be successful, and successes contribute to the positive self-evaluations, which reinforce self-esteem. Of course, this can also work with a negative cycle when communicators have low self-esteem. Although high self-esteem has obvious benefits, it doesn't guarantee interpersonal success. People with high self-esteem may think they make better impressions on others than they actually do. And you can see this with the inflated ego. So researchers generally agree that self-concept does not exist at birth. At about 6 or 7 months of age, infants begin to recognize self as distinct from their surroundings. The self-concept develops in a variety of different ways. For example, the first way or theory that the self-concept developed is through reflected appraisal, which is the mirroring of the judgments of those around you. To the extent that you have received supportive messages, you have learned to appreciate and value yourself. After receiving critical signs, on the other hand, you may feel less valuable, lovable, and capable. Social scientists use the term significant other to describe a person whose evaluations are especially influential. Messages from parents, of course, are an early and important influence on the self-concept. Teachers, friends, romantic partners, and even some acquaintances can all leave an imprint on how you view yourself. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Another way that the self-concept develops is through social comparison. In addition to using the messages we receive through reflective appraisal, we form our self-image by the process of social comparison. We evaluate ourselves in terms of comparing with others. By comparing ourselves to what we call reference groups, which is the people we use to evaluate our own characteristics. To some degree, we're in control of our reference groups. It's possible to seek out people with whom we compare more favorably. And sometimes we don't choose that, and we do this both in our day-to-day life, face-to-face, and in the online world. Now that you have a better idea of how your self-concept has developed, we can take a closer look at some of its characteristics. The self-concept is subjective. The way we view ourselves may be at odds with others' perceptions, and often with the observable facts. Sometimes we have unrealistically favorable self-appraisals. Sometimes We inflate or underestimate our self-perception. Self-evaluations can be distorted for several reasons. Obsolete information. The effects of past failures in school or school relations can linger long after they've occurred. Distorted feedback. The remarks of overly critical parents, cruel classmates, bullying can help to increase distorted feedback and make someone have lower self-esteem. The myth of perfection. From time to time, most of us feel like we need to be perfect, but this belief in perfection can distort our self-concept as well. Additionally, social expectations. Curiously, our perfectionist society generally rewards those who downplay their strengths. So sometimes the expectations from others can influence our self-concept. A healthy self-concept is flexible. People change. Shy children might turn into outgoing adults. Moody teenagers can become upbeat professionals. People also change from context to context, situation to situation, and relationship to relationship. The self-concept resists change. To be realistic, a self-concept should reflect the way we change over time, but it often does not. We resist revising it, and we even seek out people who confirm how we see our existing self. The tendency to seek confirmation of an existing self-concept is called cognitive conservatism, which appears to hold true for people in a variety of cultures. What does this mean? That we seek information that conforms to our existing self-concept. If you are in need of a self-concept change, you can do so when the following conditions exist. 4 requirements are included. Trusting an appraisal by someone we see as competent to offer it. Appraisal must be perceived as highly personal. An appraisal must be reasonable in light of what we believe about ourselves. And the appraisals must be consistent and numerous. Now we're going to talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy and communication. The self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when a person's expectation of an event and her or his subsequent behavior based on those expectations make the outcome more likely to occur. It includes 4 stages: holding an expectation, either for yourself or for others, behaving in accordance with that expectation, then the expectation comes to pass and reinforces the original expectation. So let's use an example to illustrate the concept. One morning you read your horoscope, which offers the following prediction. Today you will meet the person of your dreams and the 2 of you will live happily ever after. Assuming you believe in horoscopes, what will you do? You'll probably start making plans to go out on the town that night in search of your dream person. You'll dress up, etc. You'll be attentive, charming, witty, polite. And lo and behold, you might actually meet someone as a result. Your conclusion then? That horoscope had to be right. It can also be on the negative side. For example, if you keep telling yourself that you're going to fail a test and or quiz, you may in fact cause yourself to do so. We need to now talk about the types of the self-fulfilling prophecy. There are 2 types. Type 1 is the self-imposed prophecies, when your own expectations influence your behavior. Research has shown that communicators who believe they were incompetent proved less likely than others to pursue rewarding relationships and more likely to sabotage their existing relationships. The second type of self-fulfilling prophecies occurs when one person's expectations govern another's actions. The classic example demonstrated by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson in a study they described in their book Pygmalion in the Classroom. The experimenters told teachers that 20% of the children in a certain elementary school showed unusual potential for intellectual growth. The names of the 20% were drawn by means of a table of random numbers. Much later, these children showed significantly greater gains than did the others because that's what the professor or the teacher expected from them. So this expectation then influenced the outcome or the belief. The Golem effect explains when this might occur in a negative perspective. This must be communicated by the observer in order for this prediction to have an effect. Now, if you want to change your self-concept, there are 4 components that can help you do so. First, have realistic expectations. If you want to run a marathon, you're probably not going to be able to do it tomorrow. Have a realistic perception of yourself. Keep in mind that your self-concept might be skewed or subject to that subjectivity. Have the will to change, because you have to want to, and have the skill to change, finding people, places, YouTube videos that can help you to do so. We'll now continue with the second part of the chapter in which we talk about impression management. Identity management. Identity management is the communication strategies people use to influence how others view them. This includes the notion of the public and the private selves. To understand why impression management exists, it's necessary to understand the self in more detail. So the perceived self is the person you believe yourself to be in moments of honest self-reflection. You may be completely unlikely to reveal this whole self to another person. The presenting self is a public image, or the way we want to appear to others. In most cases, the presenting self we seek to create a socially approved image. Face work is described by sociologist Irving Goffman as the nonverbal ways we act to maintain our own presenting images and images of others. Goffman suggested that each of us maintains face by putting on a front when we're around others whom we want to impress. In contrast, behavior in the back region when we're alone might be quite different. Now that you have a sense of what impression management is, it's time to look at some of the characteristics of identity management. First, we strive to construct multiple identities. It's an oversimplification to suggest we use impression management strategies to create just one identity. In the course of a single day, most of us play a variety of different roles. Helpful coworker, joking friend, loving mother, to name just a few. So each of us constructs multiple identities, many of which may be independent or even conflicting. For example, some student athletes experience tension when the roles of student and athlete seem to have incompatible demands. The second characteristic of identity management is that it is collaborative. When we collaborate with someone else, we do it with them. Basically, this means that as we perform our multiple identities, our audience is made up of other actors who are trying to create their own characters. So my identity management is dependent on the people around me to be a part of it. Additionally, impression management can be either deliberate or unconscious. There's no doubt that sometimes we're highly aware of managing our identities. Most job interviews and first dates are clear examples of deliberate identity management, but sometimes we're not quite as aware. Additionally, people differ in their degrees of identity management. So why do we do this? We do it for social rules, for manners, to fit in. For personal goals, we have something to gain. We want something out of a relationship. Relational goals, things we want to happen within the relationship. And just so you guys know, it's actually impossible to not create impressions. How do we manage impressions? We do so face-to-face and in social media. In face-to-face interaction, communicators can manage their front in 3 ways: manner, appearance, and setting. And these can be broken down into a number or variety of different components. Manner includes words or nonverbal actions. Appearance, personal items people use to shape an image, which includes clothing, your hairstyle, your personal effects. Your setting, the physical items that you use to influence how others view them, the artifacts we decorate the space we live in, automobiles, and artwork. We also manage our identity management in mediated communication. One of the interesting things about the internet is that it offers us an opportunity to be or present yourself in a variety of different ways. So you can have one persona on your LinkedIn account, a different one on your Instagram, and a slightly different one on maybe a Facebook or a Snapchat. At first, impression management might sound like an academic label for manipulation and phoniness. And there certainly are situations where people misrepresent themselves to gain the trust of others. But online deception is probably the most common. You might think about your catfishers or things like that. However, impression management usually involves deciding which part of yourself you want to reveal. So you don't necessarily want to reveal everything to everyone because it might be too much information. And we're going to talk about that in terms of self-disclosure next. What we choose to disclose about ourselves is an important component of impression management. So what constitutes self-disclosure? Self-disclosure includes every verbal and nonverbal behavior we engage in is self-revealing. The distinguishing factors of self-disclosure are honesty, depth, availability of the information, and the context of the sharing. We have 2 models of self-disclosure we're going to talk about. And the first is the social penetration model, which talks about the degrees of self-disclosure. It has 2 dimensions that exist within it. The breadth of information, like the variety of different topics that we have, versus the depth of information, how deep we're willing to go within that relationship. And so types of information revealed might be cliches, our facts, or our opinions, or ideas about ourselves, which include our feelings. The second model is the self-disclosure Johari window model. And this was named after 2 researchers named Joe and Harry, so that might help you remember it. Joseph Luft and Harry Ingram, so it's Joe and Harry's window. Basically, imagine a frame that contains everything there is to know about you: your likes, your dislikes, your goals, your secrets, etc. The Joe-Harry window model includes the 4 parts. Part 1 is the open area, information which both you and the other person are aware. Part 2 is the blind area, the information of which you are unaware but the other person knows. Part 3 is the hidden area, the information that you know but aren't willing to reveal to others. And Part 4 is the unknown area, information that is unknown to you and others. The relative size of each area in our personal Johari windows changes from time to time according to our moods, the subject we're discussing, and our relationship with someone else. Modern culture, at least in the United States, places high value on self-disclosure. There are a variety of reasons for self-disclosing. The first is catharsis. Sometimes you might disclose information in an effort to get something off your chest. The second is self-clarification. It's often possible to clarify your beliefs, your opinions, your thoughts, your attitudes, and feelings by talking about them with someone else. The third is self-validation. If you disclose information with the hope of seeking the listener's agreement. Did I do this? Am I crazy? Should I not have done this? We self-disclose for reciprocity. A well-documented conclusion from research is that one person's act of self-disclosure increases the odds that the other person will reveal personal information. We self-disclose for impression formation. Sometimes we reveal personal information to make ourselves more attractive, and research shows the strategy seems to work. Sometimes we self-disclose because research demonstrates that we like people who disclose information to us. This helps us to grow closer to one another, to get to know one another, and serves as relational maintenance and enhancement. Sometimes we disclose personal information out of sense of moral obligation as well. So perhaps people who are HIV positive, for example, might be faced with the choice or the need out of moral obligation to share this with their partner. We also self-disclose out of social influence. And sometimes we self-disclose in self-defense. This is also known as stealing thunder, or letting someone know something before it gets back to them because it would be better coming from you. Although the benefits of self-disclosing are certainly important, opening up can also involve risks that make the decision to disclose difficult and sometimes painful. The risks of self-disclosure fall into several categories. First, rejection. The fear of disapproval is powerful. None of us wants to be rejected. Second, negative impression. Even if disclosure doesn't lead to total rejection, it can sometimes create a negative impression. Decrease in relational satisfaction. Besides affecting others' opinions of you, disclosure can lead to a decrease in the satisfaction that comes from a relationship. It can cause a loss of influence. Another risk of self-disclosure is the potential loss of influence in the relationship. Once you confess a secret weakness, your control over how the other person views you can be diminished. Revealing something personal about yourself means losing control over the information. What might happen if the person tells someone else? When you share something with someone in confidence, you cannot guarantee that they will hold on to that information. Sometimes information can hurt the other person. Even if revealing hidden information leaves you feeling better, it might hurt or upset the other person. So here are some guidelines for self-disclosure. Because self-disclosure is a special kind of sharing that's not appropriate for every situation, this will help you to do so in a way that's rewarding for you and the others involved. So you want to ask the questions. Is the other person important to you? There are several ways in which someone might be important. Perhaps you have an ongoing relationship, or this person is a coworker. Is the risk of disclosing reasonable? Most people intuitively calculate the potential benefits of disclosing against the risks of doing so. Next, is the self-disclosure appropriate? Some people have trouble with what's properly known as TMI, too much information. In general, it's not wise to divulge personal secrets with strangers in public social media posts or necessarily in classroom discussions. It makes people uncomfortable. Is the self-disclosure reciprocated? There's nothing quite as disconcerting as talking your heart out to someone only to discover that the other person doesn't have anything to say in return and will not reveal themselves to you. Additionally, self-disclosure can be a vicious tool if it's not used carefully. Each person has a psychological beltline below which some topics can be extremely sensitive. You don't want to self-disclose in an effort to harm or hurt the other person. What are some of the alternatives to self-disclosure, to telling the truth? We're going to talk about some of them. Although self-disclosure plays an important role in interpersonal relationships, it's not the only type that's available. My mother once told me, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That would be silence. Keep your thoughts and feelings to yourself. A lie is a deliberate attempt to hide or misrepresent the truth. Benevolent lies are defined as not being malicious and may even be helpful and told for the benefit of the recipient. We can also equivocate, which is another alternative to blatant truth-telling. Sometimes you might use something that's sort of true or not completely true or might have more plausible meanings. And this can be used for space saving and can sometimes save a speaker from being caught lying. It can also hint, which is additionally face saving. It's easy to see why people choose hints, equivocations, and benevolent lies instead of self-disclosure. This sometimes provides us a way to manage difficult situations. There are times when honesty is the right approach, even when painful. And here are some of the questions to keep in mind. Are the effects of a lie worth a deception? Is the indirect message in the interest of the receiver? Or is evasion the only way to behave? And this ends our Chapter 3 virtual lecture. Next, we will be talking about perception. Thanks, and have a great day, everyone.